Let's talk about strategic deployment. Um, so really, this is about collaboration. That's what Modus is all about. So it this is something I want to just enforce in everyone's mind that if you really want to get the most of your project, you probably need to collaborate with somebody. So what I really want to do in this exercise is figure out where you think we could use more stations or more tags or more maintenance, or where you plan to put out tags and um, maybe you're concerned about getting detections, or you just want to know if that's a good idea to do what you're doing. This is where to ask those questions. So I'm going to start by pointing out a few strategies for putting out stations. Um, we've The first one we can sort of think about is what we call a fence. So imagine you have this landmass, sort of like a peninsula, or a sliver of land that's connecting two bigger chunks of land, and you want to capture birds as they're funneled through this piece of land. You want to detect birds, I mean, as they travel through this land area. Well, you could put stations across that land area in a line to cut it off, and then you place your antennas in a way so that if the birds pass in between the stations or near them, then you'll detect those animals. So that's why we call it a fence, because it sort of builds this wall of detection where the animals might be passing. Now here I've got antennas also pointing upwards, and that's just to illustrate that you birds may be maybe flying along the wall, and you might not get detections as they do that. So those antennas are can be put in northward or southward just to help with getting those detections if birds do that kind of movement. Now, moving on from a fence, you can also have a grid. So this is essentially a series of fences put together. Um, and this is really useful when you're trying to detect where birds are moving throughout a landscape. So it can help you inform you about landscape use, and also about migratory path, this, which migratory path birds are taking. On a smaller scale, it can be like on the patch. You can have, instead of directional antennas, you have all these stations with just omni antennas, so they're detecting everything uniformly around them. But you have a lot of them close together, and with a grid, you can sort of figure out, okay, what part of the habitat are they using in this small study area. Um, and then the other one would be to cover a barrier. So if you want to see, do birds, well, or like how do birds cross the ocean or a lake? Um, or maybe you can use this way to see, do they cross the ocean or lake, or do they go around it? And then you'll see about timing, when they cross, how long it takes them to cross, that kind of thing. So let's look at a real world example. How do you get these sort of setups put together? Well, this is what it looks like locally where we are. We have all these different stations in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And just so you guys know, we're about right up here, uh, where the orange circle is. So um, as you can imagine, that little dark orange circle contains stations where you could place. Sorry, these stations within the circle are kind of the first bout of stations that you can sort of do a study within that one little area, and look at shorebirds moving across the bays, for instance, or what side of the bay they use, and or which bay they use. That's a really helpful, informative question, and it's a relatively easy thing to start with because it's only 5 stations that are relatively close together. You can then expand your study to include maybe 5 more stations, but in a different area. So, do birds, go on the northern shore, or do they stay in the Bay of Fundy? That's another kind of research question you can look at. And then finally, you can expand it again. And this time we put out 7 more stations and see, oh, which ones go to this bay? Is it the same birds? Are they different birds? That kind of thing. And then once you get these sort of things pieced together, you can start seeing, oh, there's just little holes here and there that can be filled in to make a fence or, a better array. So that's where the black dots can are, help fill in those gaps, and you can add those stations more easily now that you've got these 3 different study areas set up. So taking a look at some more real world examples, here's an example of a fence in the northeastern United States. So you can see kind of 2 or 3 fences going east-west. These arrows sort of illustrate that. So this helps detecting birds as they move southward or northward. Um, and you can get an idea of how quickly they're migrating and where they might be spending their time. Um, this is mainly for songbirds, but you can do something similar for shorebirds as well. Um, in southern Ontario, we have more of dense arrays, so this can be considered almost a grid. There's some gaps in there, but it's pretty grid-like for the most part. And then we have this sort of interesting fence as well, south of Lake Erie there. So this helps you identify, when birds leave Ontario and then what direction they take once they leave Ontario. And then we have the barrier. So here I've illustrated these 2 lines showing, okay, when birds cross, do they cross the Lake Erie here, or do they go around Lake Erie? So that's what a lot of the questions they've asked in this region. Uh, so that's one way they did it. So there's a lot more researchers here, a lot more money here. So that's why it's so extensive, but it's an example. You won't necessarily have to do the same. Um, so yeah, again, we can have these breakout groups. At first I was thinking having, one group for Latin America, one in the North Atlantic, and then one Western Canada/US. But there's only 2 instructors here today, and the vast majority of you are in Latin America. So I'll let you guys figure that one out. And with that.